Okay. Good morning, everybody. So you've spent a packed few days, I understand, chewing over the intricacies of financial regulation, fintech disruption, open wealth management platforms, machine learning and statistical optimization methods, and DOL. I imagine that's an acronym for something. So I thought we might discuss something a bit lighter. You'll get an insight into what I'm talking about in a second. We're going to talk about food. Actually, we're going to talk about politics. I was joking. It's not really about food. But seriously, when my colleagues at Thomson Reuters asked if I could speak to you all, I think they had something else in mind. The reason is every year I oversee about 36 columnists around the world. And every year around this time, we start to pull together our predictions for the year ahead. We're still doing that, and I'll gladly send any of you a copy of the book. Just give me your business card afterwards, and I'll make sure you get a copy. But I felt with the elections coming up here in the States in a couple of days, who the hell knows what's going to happen? So I'm not going to go out there on a limb right now and predict what happens. And also I figured you guys are probably pretty like me, just can't wait for this damn thing to be done. So we can get back to making America great again, or whatever we're going to do in a couple weeks. But I think politics is really, the discourse is interesting, and it raised some interesting, something I really wanted to talk about. And I thought I could use some personal anecdotes and do a little history, little historical research to kind of illustrate the point. Because what we know, all right, so whoever wins on Tuesday, there are like two things we can be sure of. First, the candidate who wins will have done so despite having the highest disapproval rating in the history of modern American elections. This is unprecedented, and it means President Clinton or President Trump will have or President Johnson, that's a joke, will have a substantial percentage of the country just plain disliking them. They're not going to find the job of governing any easier than President Obama has. And you can ask him, it has not been easy. Second, there appears to be a growing consensus from both campaigns on the rhetoric, spurred on by their most vocal constituents on the furthest reaches of either the left or right, that globalization is the cause for decimating the American middle class and needs in some significant way to be stopped, slowed down, or altered. International trade in goods, services, capital, and labor is the economic heart of what we have come to define today as globalization. Very important capital flows to what you all do. Trade is a proxy for free markets and the uninterrupted flow of ideas and progress across borders, I would argue. I would also argue that it's been one of the most important ingredients to peace and prosperity since, certainly in my generation, if not before. That notion is now under fire. According to the World Bank, let me see if I have some pictures. You get to vote on one of these two next week. So one thing in common is they all hate trade. According to the World Bank, trade has helped reduce by half the proportion of the global population living in extreme poverty in just the last 20 years. Much of this improvement has happened here in China, whose rate of extreme poverty dropped from about 36% at the end of the 1990s to just 6% today. Another example, see, they're no longer poor. If anyone ever been to Shanghai and looked across the river and seen that area is called Pudong. When I first went there in 1992, they were constructing that thing with the two balls, up. Now it's just this gleaming city, not on a hill, but across the river. Another example is Vietnam, which in a single generation has moved from being one of the world's poorest nations to a middle-income country. It's allowed increased investments, healthcare, education. The trouble is these gains from global trade have not been equally distributed. In a recent speech, this woman, do you know Christine Lagarde? I like this speech because she mentions me in it. But, she mentions something I wrote, not me. She said in this speech just a couple weeks ago, in the U.S., competition from low-wage countries has been one of the factors that have contributed to a decline in manufacturing and unemployment, along with a wave of automation. And this has not been spread evenly across the whole economy, but has been concentrated in some local labor markets that have faced deep, long-lasting effects from overseas competition. While most of the world wins when barriers to trade come down, there are losers. There's no question about it. I didn't say that with a hashtag losers, but someone might. And they have voices. We've seen them over the past 18 months. I mean, they've been out at Trump and Bernie Sanders rallies. I think that's where this was, arguing against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I would argue that this rage against the status quo is not going to end on Tuesday by any means. It'll take leadership and a fair amount of education to beat back the forces against globalization. And the truth is, understanding how trade works to benefit the majority of Americans, by far, it's a very nuanced affair. It's quite difficult. So I decided to break it down into what I think is an interesting narrative, one that uses tangible examples and images, because everyone likes to look at images instead of me, to put the whole issue of trade into some perspective that I hope you find instructive or at least intriguing. And it begins with this. I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, the General Electric EK4 electric carving knife. Looks good, right? We're about to go to Thanksgiving. I bet you all wish you had one of those. I actually did find one of these in my grandfather's home in New Canaan, Connecticut, a few years ago. He had passed away, and my son and I were cleaning the place out. It was on a bunch of racks in the basement. And by the way, my grandfather's a kind of perfect example of that American middle class from the two generations ago. The house was built in the 1950s on a pretty plot of about 2.5 acres, surrounded by similar homes for a sort of burgeoning, prosperous middle class. My grandfather was a sergeant in the army who served in World War II in Italy and in Yugoslavia. He never finished high school. He went to work at like 12 or 13 or something in a hat factory in a city called Danbury, Connecticut, because his own father, who was an immigrant from Italy, had become disabled. He effectively fed his family for the next few decades, including my brother and I, allowing his own younger brother to go to college after finishing high school and have a successful business career of his own. That's my grandfather there. He's the guy with the mustache. He had this handlebar mustache. By 1960, my grandfather was the proprietor of a supermarket in Wilton, Connecticut, another nice suburb in Fairfield County. And he was prosperous enough to buy a home in New Canaan. He was the fourth and founding member of a 27-hole golf club in nearby Norwalk. When we sold the house in 2007, just as an aside, before everything hit the fan, we looked at this just to give you a sense of New Canaan. It wasn't even worth selling that house. We put it on this website called teardowns.com. I don't even know if it's in business anymore. $1 million and done. This is just a 2.5 acre, because nobody wants the old, 4-bedroom Dutch colonial. Anyway, back to the knife. So here's some advertisements around the knife. So I found this box, and it was still unopened. I looked at it, and I surmised that my grandfather had bought the appliance, which features 2 alternating serrated edges that slice through an overcooked turkey, like the ones my wife makes, like butter, and cost about $19.99 in something around 1970. It still cuts amazingly. Oh, hold on, I gotta go back. It still cuts pretty amazingly. I look forward to using it in a couple weeks. In fact, it was at last Thanksgiving when I broke the knife out of the box, which says "Made in Bridgeport, Connecticut," to carve a turkey, that I began thinking about sort of its relevance to the issue of globalization and trade. You're like, what kind of dude does that on Thanksgiving? You should be drinking and slobbering away in front of the television watching football. I did all of that, but I did have this epiphany. Particularly as the campaign heated up and the whole discussion of American manufacturing took center stage, I did decide to learn more about the knife, where it was built, how it fits into the whole political and economic debate. First, I'll start, though, this is like a weird aside, but I think it's kind of important. The chain store where this thing was purchased, I'm pretty sure it was purchased, it was a place called Caldor. Anyone know what Caldor's was? Anyone ever heard of it? All right. Well, even if you didn't have one near you, a Caldor, wherever you came from, there was some variation of Caldor. I'll read you the Wikipedia entry, which I thought was cool. While shopping at an EJ Corvette store in New York City in 1951, newlyweds Carl and Dorothy Bennett had a brainstorm to open their own discount store that would be different from the average discount retailer. Their vision included several factors that had served as the chain's cornerstones of continual growth and success. Chief among these was an emphasis on quality merchandise over less desirable, lower-cost wares at prices 10 to 40% below the manufacturer's guaranteed retail price, along with department store-level services such as, this is crazy, informed salespeople. Imagine that. Merchandise guarantees and a liberal refund policy. That same year, the couple used their $8,000 in savings to open a 9,600 square foot store in a second-floor loft in Port Chester, New York. They named it Caldor, a blending of their first names, Carl and Dorothy, Caldor. Specializing in name-brand hard goods, such as home furnishings, appliance, electronics, jewelry, and sports equipment, for middle to upper income yet bargain-conscious consumers. Their slogan was, "Where shopping is always a pleasure." It was kind of a way of life for the Caldor team. The company went public in 1963 and rode the consumer boom of the next decade and a half. In 1981, it was acquired by a company called Associated Dry Goods. That's a great name. Thomson Reuters should become Associated Dry Goods. It'd be kind of cool. But they actually owned Lord & Taylor, which is sort of another sort of higher-end department stores. They bought it for $313 million, attracted by the growth potential and low debt. The 63-store chain was their first entry into the realm of discount retailers. 3 years later, Carl Bennett retired, and Caldor by then had 100 stores and $1 billion in sales. So, as you know, you probably all can guess what happened to Caldor's. In 1995, they filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy protection. They found themselves unable to compete with the lowest prices, wider selection of such stores as Walmart. By 1999, the company was liquidated, trampled in Walmart's march towards retail domination. I throw this in is because Walmart, it's worth noting, is the single biggest importer of Chinese goods, accounting for something in the order of 11% of U.S. imports from the People's Republic, according to the Economic Policy Institute. They actually estimate that Walmart has cost about 400,000 manufacturing jobs to disappear over the last 15 years. Anyway, this is just a sidebar, believe it or not, to the main discussion. What I really wanted to know was what happened to that factory in Bridgeport that made my knife, and so I did a little bit of research. I know Bridgeport. I grew up not that far away in Fairfield County. Turns out the facility was massive. You can sort of see a postcard of it from there. It once employed up to 20,000 workers. It housed a bowling alley and a pool hall for employees. Among other businesses, it housed the housewares division of General Electric, which was a hotbed of innovation. It turned out the first electric can opener, because we all need one of those, an electric fire starter, and naturally the knife in question. The basic strategy, as far as I understand it, goes back to the company founder himself, Thomas Alva Edison. The basic idea he had was to create products that would stimulate demand for the electricity generated by the turbines that GE made most of its money from and continues to make, is a core focus for the business, General Electric. But the huge factory in Bridgeport, is kind of interesting, didn't start out that way. In fact, it was itself the byproduct, or the product of another era of free trade. Originally, a New York sporting goods firm called Schuyler, Hartley & Graham selected Bridgeport for the site of their Union Metallic Cartridge Company just after the Civil War. The factory became headquarters of Remington, UMC, which is short for Union Metallic Cartridge. In 1912, it became sort of Remington's HQ. You can see it there. With the start of World War I in Europe, Bridgeport became, have you ever been to Bridgeport, Connecticut? You're right through it, right? Don't generally stop. It became sort of the New World Arsenal. It was called the Essen of America, which was the German variation of it. And Bridgeport's population exploded. It grew by nearly 50% in a 20-month period. Partly thanks to this guy. This is Tsar Nicholas II. After receiving an order from the Russian Empire in 1915 for 1 million rifles with 400 million cartridges, Remington built the factory that I showed you before of 13 buildings, along with 80 acres of floor space. That's a picture of what it looks like from Google Earth. You can see there's like a continuous hall and 13 of these six-story headquarters. That's what it looks like now. They took it down brick for brick about 5-6 years ago. Anyway, they hired 1,500 new workers a month until 17,000 of them were engaged in arms production. They churned out about 5,000 rifles and 5,000 bayonets a day in 1917. By the way, this is outsourcing to America. I think you get that, right? And the Tsar was so concerned that he was going to be ripped off that he sent over more than 1,000 of his own men to supervise the production to, quote, make sure he was not cheated, according to a history of the plant that GE has. Anyway, the Russian order was nearing completion when, of course, the Russian Revolution takes over, deposing Tsar Nicholas II, and the new Russian government refused to pay for the rifles and ammunition. So as a result, Remington sold the effectively bankrupt company to General Electric. Over the years, the GE plant would churn out all manner of industrial products, but also the consumer appliances like percolators. Everyone missed the percolated coffee from their grandparents? Man, that was the worst. It just boiled it, right? It just boiled it with a little bubble on the top, and then you drink it, and progress. In fact, but it also made the toasters, and of course my grandfather's knife. First model hit the stores around 1962. Now, if we can show it, I want to take you on a little more nostalgia tour. Do you have the video? Cue video. This is awesome, this one.
Now, the imagination and technology of General Electric Research comes a most exciting new portable appliance, the General Electric all-purpose carving knife. Now you can carve and slice at home like a professional. Fast, accurate, easy perfection. Compare with the ordinary knife on the right. And it's versatile. Fruits, breads, vegetables, desserts. And the General Electric carving knife is economical because there's less waste. This lightweight, perfectly balanced electric knife will do most of your cutting chores.
Whoa!
Two fast-moving stainless steel blades glide you through every type of food you need to cut. And these strips of super hard tungsten carbide give you an edge that lasts longer than the finest steel. The electric knife's generous cord allows you to take it where it's needed. And it's easy to clean. Just snap out the blades and wash. No more messy, uneven slices.
Oh,
No more crush
jeez.
or crumble.
Ah,
Do away with mess and waste with the General Electric carving knife. It works wonders for all cutting jobs. That snack for unexpected guests. Special holiday dinners. Dessert for a bridge party. Sunday dinner for the whole family. And of course, for every day. Perfect for the housewife and the man of the house. An excitingly new and different gift, the General Electric carving knife.
That's so great. But really, when you have those unexpected guests at the bridge party and you got to slice into the Velveeta. Anyway, thanks. The next 15 years or so were a kind of a golden time for the American consumer business, and indeed, manufacturers and exporters like General Electric, were in great times. It was fantastic. In fact, the United States ran a trade surplus with the rest of the world up until about 1976. Mao Zedong's disastrous Cultural Revolution was just starting up in China around that time, wrapping up, I should say. It would be decades before sort of China as the world's manufacturing factory floor kicked into gear. But in many ways, these years were golden ones for middle-class Americans, too. And indeed, I recently visited the GE archives in Schenectady, New York, which is where the company used to be headquartered. Now it's their power business is there now. I wanted to understand what life was like inside this factory. So one of the historians there handed me this thick stack of what's called the Bridgeport Works News. It's to sift through. This was like a fortnightly newspaper distributed at the plant for more than half a century. It was pretty amazing. Here's some excerpts. You've got the story of this guy named Adolf Hupert, who is GE's oldest pensioner, turning 99. Receives more than his earnings. It's kind of funny. That doesn't happen very often now. And you have, here's where we stood before the new pay increases. So, a little bit of internal propaganda about GE cost of living versus other workers in the U.S. in manufacturing. And then GE pay per hour for employees up 36% versus 13% for inflation. A little nice thing about employee benefits. And there's a nice woman from one of their videos there. You had this great column called The Sportlight, which focused on the factory's sports teams, though there only seems to have been one, bowling. I mean, it's really right out of Laverne and Shirley. On Wednesday evenings at the Nutmeg Lanes, the GE girls team holds sway, competing in a 10-team league, which includes Sikorsky, Lycoming, Dictaphone, Bridgeport Brass, Bryan Electric, Sprague Meter, Bridgeport Metal Goods, Jenkins, and Vitremont. I think one of those companies is still in existence, Sikorsky. Then there's the GE company store. See that? Accent on value, go for 5. They advertise rebuilt toaster ovens, waffle bakers, and percolators. I mean, there's nothing worse than the only thing worse than a percolator is a rebuilt one. But I do like the idea of an ice skate sharpener for $2.17. There's also practical information on labor negotiations and innovation. So this is kind of interesting. You see, this is from a couple of different ones. All these are from 1962, 63 when they came out with the electric carving knife. Slice Like a Pro film wins award. I love that. It's got to be the best movie ever. But nostalgia for places like the Bridgeport factory and the era in which they thrived has clearly driven the popularity, arguably, of Trump and Sanders in the U.S. presidential race, and has caused Hillary Clinton to backtrack on her views about TPP and globalization in general. They all rail against sort of free trade, globalization, and promise to somehow return to that golden era for American working and middle-class people. We saw similar rhetoric play into Britain's vote on leaving the European Union. I don't know if you know that guy, Nigel Farage. Homegrown workers, the sort of narrative goes, have been displaced, good jobs have vanished, ordinary people's wages have been stagnant, or nearly so, for years, so blame cheap foreign labor. In the Brexit debate, you can blame immigrants. Even the latest chapter in the carving knife story is kind of interesting. Doesn't obviously change that picture. Earlier this year, GE completed the $5.6 billion sale of its white goods business, which originally housed that housewares division that made the knife. They began making cooking and heating devices in 1907, and they sold it to Haier, a company based in Qingdao, China. Haier would have been, at the time that my grandfather bought the knife, it would have been called the Red Star Electric Appliance Factory. Kind of funny. Now it owns GE's appliances business. But what's lost in the telling of this and countless other sort of wistful anecdotes, like the one I've been telling you, in the US, elsewhere, and is the other side of the story. Developed economies have gained hugely from freer trade, something which, as economists think about such things, expands available pool of labor well beyond national borders. The trouble in making the case for globalization that it simply doesn't tug at anyone's heartstrings. You can't pull out like that video, right? That makes you sort of wistful in so many ways or nostalgic. I recently had a chat with the finance minister of Belgium about this, which has seen its fair share of hollowing out, right? In fact, just 2 weeks ago, as you may recall, the comprehensive economic and trade agreement between Canada and the European Union nearly blew up. The Parliament of Wallonia, yes, it does exist, had opposed the deal, and Wallonia's coal and steel and manufacturing businesses had gotten their butts kicked over the years. So that was, you saw that that was really what was happening there. The finance minister told me that the advantages of trade are divided and shared among the entire population, so the per capita impact seems relatively small. But the disadvantages can be huge and highly concentrated and visible. That's why it's essential for policymakers to explain the benefits clearly. But of course, with so few political leaders willing to speak up for the free movement of goods and people and capital, I guess I sort of thought my humble carving knife might do the trick. So GE no longer makes carving knives. In fact, it sold this division to Black & Decker, the tool maker, which also does appliances, obviously, in 1983 for $300 million. After 3 years, the products lost the GE brand name. So you can see that's, if you go to Amazon today, there's basically the knife. Although it doesn't have the cord, which you all got a kick out of the cord part. I think that is kind of funny. So today, that knife, made overseas through a supply chain that's largely Asian, would cost you about $15.99. That's like $4 cheaper than its 46-year-old antecedent. But adjust that price, the price my grandfather paid, in today's terms, and he paid basically $120, the equivalent of 7 of those knives, right? And so that's sort of one way to think about the benefits of globalization. Also automation, of course, but generally globalization. Which got me thinking, so surely electric carving knives are not the only products. So I'll put this into context. So you paid $19.99 in 1971. Today you pay $15.99. The percentage of the monthly median income in the United States would have been 2.7% in 1971. It's 0.34% today. So I got out a 1971 Sears Roebuck catalog. I found it on eBay. The funny thing is, those things were free, right? They landed in your mailbox. I don't know if anyone remembers those things. I do. It cost me $22 on eBay. This is the only thing that's gone up in value, I think. So nearly everything in its pages back then was made in the United States. There was this, for instance. This is an air conditioner, 5,000 BTU, 3-speed air conditioner, I think, advertised for $139.95 back then. You can get a Frigidaire model, or no, that's a higher model, I think, over there. Is it higher? Yeah, for $129.99, same functionality and everything. So put that in today's dollars, it's $834. That's the purchasing power, basically the inflation-adjusted price versus $129.99. Now put that into percentage of median monthly income. It basically would have cost you 19% of your monthly paycheck to buy that product in 1971. Today it costs you 2.8%. That's median monthly income. So, obviously for all of you guys, it's going to cost nothing. No. But for this it shows you just the difference. Here's a refrigerator from the Sears catalog. $179.95 versus a $499 model today comes to $1,000, and then again, 19% of median monthly income. People would have had to save up. They would have had to probably do layaway plans and that kind of thing, which Sears was very happy to do, I think. But wait, there's more. So here's a Ted Williams 2-man pack tent with inside zip storm flaps. Pretty cool. Here's what you did with it back in the 60s, apparently. My assistant put that in. I like that picture. I guess it's like sort of Woodstock. There's this other version. It's called today's version. You got online for Poco Devo. It's called 2-person tent. give you an idea. Again, just for your leisure time, tent would have cost you 8% of your monthly wages. Today, it's 0.4%, negligible. The comparisons go on, from appliances to clothing, toolkits to babies' toys. Oh, I have a really good one just for fashion's sake here. Sports coats. I still like all of the ones on the left better than the right. And that's like a DKNY from Sears, right? $238 for that puppy. Again, 5.3%. That's pretty, that gives you an idea of just how different we're talking about. Oh, wait, gas oven. Forgot I had this one, $125, $745. Again, 16.6% of your income versus 7.5%. Nobody would argue that saving a theoretical $100 here or there is an acceptable trade-off, I think, for the loss of millions of decent, middle-class, well-paying jobs. But in the context of what U.S. consumers spend every year, $12 trillion, or around 2/3 of our GDP, the benefits are massive and widely shared, but nobody talks about how widely shared those are. It's not part of the conversation. Telling Americans that the quid pro quo for bringing jobs back home, as Donald Trump says he would do, if you said that it would be a 7-fold increase in the price of lots of the goods that they buy every day, I think it would make the soundbite a lot less appealing. The truth is, most of the jobs, like the ones at the GE Bridgeport Works that produced my carving knife, my grandfather's carving knife, they're never coming back. We can become wistful or angry about it, but it's arguably one of the byproducts of our evolving economy. Here's another way to look at it. Is anybody here a Cubs fan? Did you guys hear they won the World Series? Did you guys hear about that? It's pretty cool. Well, in 1908, the last time they had won it, farmers made up about 1/3, actually like 38% of the American labor force. Any guess from you fancy wealth management types what farmers make up today in the U.S. labor force? Take a guess? 1%. Oh, it might be more. I haven't looked at today's jobs report, but probably not a lot different. And that doesn't, there are a lot of like dudes from Brooklyn who are moving into the farms and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it'll go up to 2%, which wouldn't be terrible, actually. Anyway, likewise, the percent of people who worked in goods-producing industries back then, such as mining, manufacturing, construction, stood at about 31% back when the Cubs won their last but one World Series. Today, that number is 9%. 9% manufacturing. Put that in perspective, though, it was around 19% at the start of the 21st century. So the decline has been pretty steep and pretty rapid over the course of one generation of the labor force, right? 15, 16, 17 years, coinciding with China's entry into the World Trade Organization. But also, those savings that have accrued to the American consumer have been rapid, and we've seen that over the last 15 years. Two economists, a guy named Pablo Feigelbaum of UCLA and Amit Kandarwal of Columbia, did some interesting work on this that illustrates the point. According to their study, which The Economist recently wrote about in a superb special report about a month ago, Americans on high incomes would lose 28% of their purchasing power if borders were closed effectively to trade. Sounds bad, but the poorest consumers would lose fully 2/3 of their spending power because they buy more imported goods. And those imported goods, those costs are a much higher percentage of their monthly median or annual incomes, as we saw before. Displaced workers, though, have voices. They have families to feed, they have stories to tell, and they experience genuine suffering. I talked to this guy the other day who runs Union Pacific, which basically brings goods across the country on railroads. And he said, his quote to me was, "Open trade creates dislocation, and that has to be dealt with. But equally clearly, the many benefits of trade need to be articulated, and that's not happening in the current political climate. As a result, global trade is not getting its fair shake in the dialogue, and that can have serious consequences." And I agree with him. It was certainly the case with what they call the Tariff Act of 1930. That's named for these two guys, Congressman Willis Hawley and Senator Reed Smoot. In 1930, the act raised import duties on 890 core products and is touted by economists as a catalyst for the Great Depression and the associated catastrophic loss of employment in this country. Closing borders to protect, I use that in quotation marks, to protect good jobs isn't therefore the answer if you believe in history. Explaining how free trade benefits everyone requires a really nuanced approach, and the losers deserve a fair hearing too. And they might actually need more help than they've been getting. That's something that had been lost in the NAFTA. And this is where Donald Trump and others are absolutely right. Those folks have not been, they haven't, those people who lose their jobs, have lost their jobs, have not actually been sort of mainstream back into a services economy. So I just think I want to bring this to your attention. Such precision in all these debates is sort of missing on both sides of the Atlantic. This is happening everywhere, by the way. And I just thought maybe my carving knife could provide some insight into this whole thing. So thank you for indulging me in this exploration of my consumer appliance. I hope you find it instructive, or at least a welcome distraction from the choice you have to make on Tuesday. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. $15.99, Amazon.com. Can't wait. Although I don't think I'm making a turkey this year. Did you see that prime rib? Only the man of the house is able to actually cut it, though. Thank you very much. Thanks, no problem. My pleasure.